President Trump signed a sweeping piece of legislation into law, one that went through both the House and the Senate through negotiations back and forth that changed the way that Washington policy is going to be approached at the state level for a generation. It affected the way that we look at border security. It affected the way that we're going to be doing energy development. It affected the way that we're going to be educating our children. And it really is going to resonate for a long period of time. And we went and had a conversation here today focusing mainly on the border and immigration aspects, simply because States Trust, not too long ago, back in December, released a policy brief that examined how the reconciliation package that moved forward could impact border security. And luckily, we're joined here today by one of the co-authors, Matt Dickerson, the Director of Budget Policy at EPIC, as well as TPPF's Selene Rodriguez, who is the Campaign Director for Secure and Safe Texas. And we want to dive a little bit deeper into kind of what our recommendations were, what we saw come to fruition through those recommendations in the actual package. And then, like I said, maybe have a little broader conversation about what we can do going forward. So, Matt, maybe you could start us off by telling us, what you saw come out of this package with regards to border security and how kind of, the recommendations that were made in the policy brief that you co-authored were kind of put into law.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Chris. It's great to be here with our friends at TPPF. Maybe I'll start at the beginning, which was more than a year ago at this point when we saw the momentum building in 2024 for the election, and we knew that we were going to have the opportunity to use the budgetary process called budget reconciliation to advance the priorities of the American people. Things like reducing inflation and, of course, implementing border security. This budgetary process is really impactful because you can pass it through the Senate without having to go through the normal 60-vote filibuster process. So we could actually advance President Trump's priorities to secure the border, which is essential. And so we started thinking about what are the types of resources that Customs and Border Patrol are going to need? What are the resources that ICE is going to need? And so we started working with our friends at TPPF to lay out that roadmap for what that looks like. It looked like investments in the border wall system. It looked like investments in detention facilities. It looked like investments to get resources to the states that are affected by Biden's border surge, getting resources to ICE. And we were able to get that in the one big beautiful bill that was signed into law on July 4th.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about the way that state leaders and border communities can implement some of the things that were passed in this recent bill?
Yeah, so obviously in Texas, we bore the brunt of the Biden border crisis through those 4 years. And because of that, we had to spend over $11 billion on Operation Lone Star, which is our military department, our public safety department coming together to say, hey, if you're not going to take a stand, Texas will. And that's what we did. But unfortunately, it costs a lot of money. So we're very grateful to see the reimbursement here. Now, there's a couple different types of reimbursement. If you don't mind, I just kind of want to break it down because it took me a really long time to sift through this very large bill and understand it. But when senators and representatives were talking about it, they kept saying, hey, here's $13 billion for state relief for Texas, but it's kind of broken up into a couple of different sections, and when you put it together, it is that amount. So first you have your state border security reinforcement fund, which is $10 billion, and of course it outlines the criteria, and of course Texas meets that criteria, and states can apply to that if they do, and then with that they also have to state how they spent the money that they want to get reimbursed and how they plan to spend the money that they'll be appropriated. So that's a key factor there. And then there's another part that's, I think, $3.5 billion. And that's actually called, and I wrote this down because I didn't want to forget it, Bridging Immigration-Related Deficits Experienced Nationwide Reimbursement Fund, or the Biden Reimbursement Fund, is what it's called in the bill. So that's
names.
Yeah, the additional $3.5 billion is in there. And then, of course, it also has that criteria outlined again. So Texas will clearly get the bulk of that. At least we hope so, right? And then other states who helped Texas in that fight, they sent personnel, military, public safety officers, tools for infrastructure barriers that we've led the way on. That's all stuff that we can get paid back for. Now, how we spend that moving forward is going to be very interesting. Obviously, in Texas, there's a big gap on how leaders want to spend it. And that's across party lines. You have leaders that are saying, hey, we need to put this back in education, even though we fund education over like $90 billion right now. We should do it to property taxes, which we have a special session ongoing right now on property tax relief. There's a lot of different ideas floating out there. But I think what it's going to come down to is the Department of Homeland Security and the president want to see that Texas and other states will continue to fund operations to secure not just our state, but therefore the entire nation.
Right. Yeah. Anything to add there? To anything that kind of stood out to you as far as what states can take advantage of, specific policy applications that the bill passed?
Yeah, I think one of the important things to know is that border security is really a federal and state partnership, right? States like Texas are bearing the brunt of the invasion that was occurring at the southern border. And so the federal government is going to be surging really significant resources. I mean, it's really generational resources. For context, the bill is providing over the next couple of years what the equivalent of what is 6 normal years of appropriations for Customs and Border Patrol. So it's $130 billion in new resources for U.S. CBP, when that's normally it gets about $20 billion in the annual budget. We're given a one-time lump sum of $30 billion to ICE, and that's normally a $10 billion annual appropriation. So in addition to the normal funding that we're going to get through the annual appropriations process, there's very significant resources for infrastructure, for personnel, for equipment, for support for both federal agencies, but also going to the state agencies to build out infrastructure and expand personnel as well.
Right.
Can I add to that?
Please.
I'm so glad you said generational, because that's exactly the case that we're going for. Anybody who knows in the border security sphere, Mark Morgan, who's an excellent voice in these conversations, he actually recently wrote a piece in Fox News talking about how while we have states like Florida putting up temporary facilities like Alligator Alcatraz and what the state of Texas will plan to do with our land down there in South Texas, that's all excellent. We should be trying to do everything we can to expedite this mass deportation agenda. But we also have to set up for permanence. And that is a key thing here that I think we don't want to bypass when we have these conversations. We have this historic funding, but we're not always going to have the leadership that we have today under President Trump, under Governor Abbott, Governor DeSantis leading the way on these types of policies. So we have to use this time to really prepare for what comes next when we have a different administration or when we have governors that aren't going to take these issues as seriously as they are. And so I'm so glad you said that, because that is absolutely the case here.
Yeah, so a selfish plug, former TPPF alum Rodney Scott is running CPP and is going to be using these resources, and it's nice to know that he's going to have those enough resources to be able to facilitate what hopefully becomes a generational change.
That's exactly right.
Approach. Absolutely. So going on to a little bit more of positive aspects about the One Big Beautiful Bill, the rescissions of unused federal funds, what does that mean for taxpayers and for states' governments?
Yeah, well, one of the best things about this bill is that there's just so many things, and you ticked off many of those in your intro, but it really helps address the unsustainability of federal spending. Lots of people have talked about the deficit impact, but that's because we prevented a massive $4.5 trillion tax increase on the American people. And so under Washington's math, that's called a massive deficit increase. But also, as a part of this bill, we bent the cost curve on federal spending programs. And one of the best ways they did that was by attacking these programs, or attacking the unsustainability of these programs that cause states to spend even more money. Specifically in Medicaid, there was lots of reforms that were included in Medicaid to help get people off of dependency and back into the workforce. So for the first time, we're going to include new work requirements for able-bodied adults who are receiving welfare benefits so that they can move off of welfare back into the workforce. And that's an amazing thing that I think we're really excited to see how states like Texas implement those work requirements and crack down on other money laundering schemes that states like California and New York were really abusing to funnel money to certain politically connected providers at the expense of federal taxpayers. And it just drives up costs and makes it more difficult for people who actually need care to obtain good health care.
Also, I was hearing discussions about in the bill that it would restrict the ability of the federal government to pay for certain amounts of funding for Medicaid and other services to illegal immigrants. Can you kind of elaborate a little more on the mechanisms that did that?
Yeah, so that's a huge problem. And one of the massive pull factors for illegal immigration is that when migrants would come to the border, they would say a few magic words and the Biden administration would give them a status, which would then qualify them for federal welfare benefits. And that was an enormous amount of money. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that more than $170 billion in taxpayer spending would be flowing over a decade to the migrants who came here as a result of the Biden border crisis, $170 billion. And so one of the good things that the One Big Beautiful Bill did was try to crack down on that sum for programs like Medicaid and food stamps. They implemented and strengthened the requirements to ensure that people who are receiving welfare benefits are actually eligible. And by rolling back some of the Biden rules the Biden administration actually told states that they were not allowed to check to see if people were eligible for Medicaid, which is incredible. So the One Big Beautiful Bill did things like rolling back those regulations and implemented stronger standards to keep people who are eligible for the program, only those people receiving benefits.
Right. Were there any other reforms, Selene, that kind of stood out to you, other kind of fiscal or regulatory reforms?
I'll admit I focused on the Homeland Security side of things, but I do want to toot your horn a little bit because you were a little humble in the beginning there, but there was so much that you and the other author identified in the paper that resulted in the bill. And it wasn't just that, it was also the addition or increase of fees for asylum, for overstay, for returning illegally. Expanding 287G was a huge factor in that, which I'll say I'm very happy about working in the Texas legislature because we were able to pass a historic bill this past session, Senate Bill 8, which requires 234 county sheriff's departments in Texas to apply and enter into the 287G program, making Texas the second state to lead in legislation like that, right behind Florida. So to see that the administration is prioritized, not just saying, hey, we're going to be okay with you to do this, but saying, hey, states, we expect you to play a role in homeland defense is historic and absolutely the precedent that we need to run with at this point.
Yeah, that's a great point on the immigration fees. That's a huge new regime change in the way that the immigration programs have been previously administered, because previously the Biden administration had to assess some fees for some immigrants, right? So when people are coming through the legal system, they have to pay the cost of processing their applications. Well, when people were coming here and just claiming asylum and trying to get status, the Biden administration was waiving their fees, which for people who are actually following the rules and trying to follow the right system, they were having to bear the full cost, not only of themselves, but of the people who are abusing the system. And so there's important new rules, new fees that are in place, and importantly, the administration can never waive them.
And I'll add to that one more that you just reminded me of, the remittance fee.
Yeah.
For the first time, we now have a 1% tax on all foreign remittances. You know, I thought, okay, we'll get lucky if we get one, maybe just on Mexico or maybe just Mexico and Canada because they're our neighbors. But no, it's all foreign nations as far as I understand. And it's 1%. Right. I think it started out in original talks at 3.5. So it did go down, but it is a remittance fee nonetheless. And of course, we've already seen Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum come out and say, you know, we're going to see how we can subvert this for Mexicans, but it's there. And that's, you know, another great step in the direction we need to be going.
Great. Yeah. No, and I think it's important to highlight how, you know, we're not just talking about building a wall. We're talking about a holistic approach towards putting together a reform that can continue to last, like you said, for a generation. And I think that, again, it's just a wonderful opportunity that if we pursue this thing effectively, and if we try to implement these policies effectively, we can make a real substantive change. I should point out that the other co-author to our piece that we released in December, Matt Egan, also is going to be helping out Commissioner Scott.
That's right.
And so it's nice to see TPPF not only writing the material that's coming together to help inform policy, but is also actively getting engaged in serving their country in those important roles when the opportunity presents itself. So it's we're not just writing papers; we're also getting out there and getting our hands dirty in the end to make sure that we can push some of these important agendas forward.
I mean, when we released the report together in December, but it was injected directly into the President Trump's transition team, right? So it was helping develop policy and the request from the administration from the very beginning. And so it's no wonder that the final bill that was signed into law by the president looks pretty similar to what we were laying out last fall.
So let's switch gears to kind of looking forward a little bit. There is possibly another reconciliation opportunity coming up in this fall. Do you see any particular things that stand out to you that are important considerations for that package that might help build on this success?
That's right. So they do have another couple of bites at this reconciliation budgetary process, which is a really exciting tool. And I know that Speaker Mike Johnson is committed to that publicly. Leader Thune in the Senate has talked about the need or the opportunity there to use this budgetary process to continue to advance President Trump's priorities. And so I think there's some really important things that were left on the table in this process simply because they ran out of time, right? We wanted to sign the bill into law by July 4th. And so they basically had to put pencils down and get it signed into law, right? So there's some important reforms to Medicaid, for example, that were discussed, but just simply didn't have time to get through the process. There were other pieces of the process where they were negotiating some of the language to try to get through the parliamentary rules, but weren't able to get the best version of the bill enacted into law. And so if they have more time, they could work through some of those aspects, including some of the things on keeping illegals off of programs is an important aspect.
Right. Selene, is there anything kind of that stands out that you'd like to see advance in a kind of a next round?
Yeah, I think I'm coming at this from a state mind of
Please.
what is Texas going to do with this money, right? And I think what the responsibility is going to focus here going into the next round is how the states come out with the funding that we're going to be receiving. For example, there's a couple of things that were in our brief that the TPPF put out that didn't make it. A small one that most people might not bat an eye at, which is ending or eradicating carrizo cane. Most people are like, oh, okay, well, there's already a program in Texas, the carrizo cane eradication program. It's not really eradicating carrizo cane, unfortunately, and it is a problem. You know, there's a spot in Eagle Pass that was pretty much a hot spot for illegal crossings at one point, and it's completely cleared out now. You wouldn't know it, but if you went there a year before, it was completely full of cane. And if you talk to any of the DPS officers or the guardsmen that work there, they'll tell you we had so many smuggling and trafficking issues here because we had no visibility. And then thanks to Operation Lone Star, we were able to come in, the Army Corps of Engineer, eradicate the carrizo cane there, and then take full control of at least that one portion, right? So it is a huge issue, and it didn't make it in. So there's still smaller factors like that. But then when it goes to what can the states do, we're going to have this funding for 287G expansion. We're going to see what the remittance tax does. I think it's a good time to reevaluate and say, now that we have this historic budgeting, where are those gaps that still exist and how do we address that? For example, Operation Stone Garden. There's new funding, $450 million for Operation Stone Garden. I think the past two funding cycles were like up to $90 million maybe. So that is also a huge increase from what we're used to. But we have to go at that more responsibly than we have in the past. Now, the thing about Operation Stone Garden, it's not like 287G. You don't enter into this saying, we're going to enforce immigration law. We're going to act like Border Patrol for the local agencies. It's a grant that says, hey, you're in a border region, you have more cross-border traffic, so here's money to help you tackle that as you see fit. That's basically what it does. And for that reason, unfortunately, there's some agencies, local agencies that are corrupt and don't handle those funds very well. And so we might have to do a reevaluation of that. You know, how can we ensure that the taxpayer dollars are being spent responsibly and actually doing the mission that they're supposed to be doing? So I think as this funding starts to trickle down to where it's supposed to be, we need to be very careful about making sure that we're spending it responsibly so that we know what money actually needs to go where and what gaps still exist in the future, especially for the states, because that's such a key component of this discussion.
Absolutely. And we are called States Trust here. So we're looking to make the best opportunities for states to be able to effectively implement these policies. So what can policy organizations like TPPF or EPIC do kind of going forward to make the most of this opportunity?
I think that one of the best things we can do is education, right? There was this very large bill that touched so many different policy areas, right? It promoted school choice. We prevented large tax increase on American families. There's new abilities for businesses to invest and build new factories and take advantage of tax policy there. There's amazing pro-life and values successes that we included in the bill. There's historic investments in border security. I mean, there's things to improve the higher education system. So there's just so many things to go talk about. So I think we need to go educate both federal lawmakers, but also state and local lawmakers about how are you actually going to go and implement these changes in policy, right? How are we going to go stand up the new Medicaid work requirements so that they aren't abused like some states have abused work requirements and food stamps, for example, in other states. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done about the kind of lower level policy details of the bill and what it does and how it's going to affect people, right? There's a lot of misinformation about the top line levels, but when you actually start talking about what's actually in the bill and what it's going to do and how it affects people, these are all 80-20 issues.
And Selene, just kind of throwing a final question out there. You know, we work at a state think tank that's focused on providing resources not only to state legislators but also to help federal policymakers understand these issues better. What do you think other states and other state think tanks are engaged in this process? What can they do, you think, to again try to not only just make change within their states but broader change that helps states become a little more embedded in the federalist institutions that we have that allow them to be the leaders and not just the followers from DC?
Just eradicate government. No, I'm just kidding. I think leaning like on what you said about education is great, but or to add to that, relationship building in this line of work is so important. You have to learn how to leverage the relationships that you build, and you have to work really hard to build them. TPPF, we've been a great example. On my team at Secure and Sovereign Texas, leading on homeland security issues, we have to create a network of homeland security professionals, and that's across party lines, that's across federal, state, and local agencies. So we work a lot with sheriff's departments, we work a lot with task forces, with DHS, DEA, you name it. We have to get our feet in everywhere because we have to have the most up-to-date intelligence and resources and information to take to congressional leaders, to state leaders, so that they can actually make good policy that benefits everybody and not just hear from maybe one side that they would get otherwise. So I think organizations like ours, think tanks, do tanks as we like to call ourselves, across the country, we need to come together and leverage those networks because we can't work in silos. And that's exactly what we've seen with Homeland Security. And that's the reason you need actions like we've had under President Trump, because we have been operating in silos for so long when it comes to homeland defense that now we have cartels who have grown into foreign terror networks. We have so much gaps within our law enforcement operations. And so when we bring it all together, you can actually take on those big issues. And I think the same thing would go for how we attack policy here in America. We need to do it together. We can't keep operating within our own little factions or our cliques. We have to come together and say, this is a policy that works for America, who's on board and who's going to get it done. So relationships and education absolutely go hand in hand.
All right. Thank you very much. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up, but we're going to be continuing to have these conversations. You know, just because this bill passed doesn't mean that there's not still a fight to be had over not only going forward with the next reconciliation package, but the implementation of this law and advising policymakers about how they can effectively implement it to make sure that states like Texas and others are taking full advantage of the opportunities that we've created here. So if there's any advice or comments that you have for us that our listening audience would like to give us, please give us that feedback. We'd love it. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next time.